George and I spent over 40 years building a life together. But one day, I started noticing things I couldn't ignore. Late nights, secret messages, and a closeness with our new neighbor that broke my heart. I overheard a conversation that shattered everything I thought I knew. What happened next changed my life forever. Stay with me to hear how I faced betrayal, gathered proof, and turned my pain into strength. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more real stories like mine. I still remember the day George stopped looking at me the way he used to. It wasn't sudden, like a snapped thread, but a slow unraveling, barely noticeable at first, like the fading light in a room when the sun dips behind the hills. We'd been married for over 40 years, long enough that I thought nothing could shake the foundation we'd built together. Our small home in Asheville, North Carolina, held decades of memories, some heavy, some light. We had raised our children here, struggled with money, celebrated the little things. But that day, that quiet moment when his eyes slipped away from mine, was when I first felt the chill. George had always been my rock. I depended on him like the earth depends on the sun to rise each day. But slowly things started to shift. He began coming home later, a little more distant. His clothes became sharper, pressed shirts, cologne I barely recognized. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe work was stressing him out. Maybe he was just tired. But the feeling in my gut kept twisting tighter. The man who used to sit beside me every night, sharing stories and laughter, was slipping away. I caught the signs, those little things that gnaw at your soul when you don't want to see the truth. A message beeped on his phone when I wasn't looking, quickly hidden. He took calls in the other room, lowering his voice. The distance grew, but it wasn't just that. It was who he was with. Margaret. She was our new neighbor, recently divorced, moving in just a few doors down from us. A lively woman with sharp eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. I watched them carefully, that uncomfortable tightening in my chest every time they crossed paths. One afternoon, I found myself at the local cafe, pretending to read the newspaper while I waited for George. That's when I overheard their conversation. Their voices were low, but the words were clear enough to cut through me like a knife. I didn't need to hear much to know. This was more than friendship. My heart shattered in that crowded room, and everything I had believed about our life came crashing down. Nights after that were the hardest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind swirling with questions and pain I couldn't name. How could the man who promised me forever betray me like this? How do you cope when the person you trusted most becomes a stranger? Anger bubbled under my skin, but beneath it was a deep, aching sorrow. It felt like I was losing not just him, but myself. I realized confrontation alone wouldn't be enough. I had to take back control over my life, my story. So I began watching, quietly and carefully. I collected every whisper, every secret glance, every moment they thought no one was watching. I gathered evidence not for revenge, but to find a way to reclaim my dignity. George's birthday arrived on a chilly autumn evening. I invited everyone, family, friends, neighbors, everyone who mattered. Margaret came too, with that same careless smile, acting like she had nothing to hide. The house was full of laughter and music, but beneath it all, my heart was pounding. When it was time for my speech, the room fell silent. I stood before them, my hands steady, my voice clear. I thanked everyone for coming. But then I said something unexpected. This night wasn't just about George's birthday. It was a turning point in my life. I revealed everything. The hidden messages, the secret calls, the betrayal laid bare for all to see. The shock was electric. Faces turned pale. Whispers spread. But the real surprise was yet to come. I told them about Margaret's secret affair with another neighbor, a retired attorney who lived just 2 blocks away. She had been playing them both using these relationships for her own gain. George's face drained of color. Margaret, caught in her own web, fled the party, humiliated and exposed. As I watched them leave, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Strength. No betrayal, no heartbreak could ever take away my worth. That night marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I was ready to rebuild, to prove that even in pain, there is hope and dignity. But this was only the beginning of what I had to face. The days that followed George's birthday party were some of the hardest I had ever lived through. The house felt emptier, colder somehow, even though the walls were still full of memories. I kept waiting for something to happen. A word, a knock on the door, an apology, but nothing came. George stayed away more and more, and when he did come home, the silence between us was thick and heavy. Margaret had disappeared from the neighborhood as fast as she'd come, but the damage she left behind lingered like a shadow. I couldn't stop replaying every moment in my mind. The way George looked at me before he started changing. The way his smile had begun to fade. How had I missed it all? How had we drifted so far apart while still living under the same roof? My heart ached not just for the betrayal, but for the years we lost to this quiet unraveling. My children, grown now and scattered across the country, reached out with gentle questions. They sensed something was wrong but didn't know how to pry without hurting me. I kept my answers vague, hiding the full weight of my sorrow behind practiced smiles and soft words. I didn't want to burden them. They had their own lives to live. Still, the silence between us was loud enough to echo through every call, every visit. There were nights when I sat on the porch, wrapped in my favorite shawl, staring out at the fading light and wondering if I'd ever find peace again. The trees whispered secrets in the wind, but none of them could tell me how to mend a broken heart. My hands trembled when I reached for the photo albums, those fragile pages holding frozen moments of laughter and love. They felt like relics from a time that no longer existed. The neighbors kept their distance, unsure how to act around me. I wasn't sure if it was pity or judgment, but I felt isolated in my own community. Even simple errands became exercises in bravery. I saw their eyes flicker with curiosity or discomfort, and I turned my face away, pretending the stares didn't cut as deep as knives. George and I shared the same space but lived in different worlds. He avoided the kitchen where I worked to prepare meals that often went untouched. I tried to find comfort in small routines, watering the plants, brewing tea at the same time each afternoon. But even those moments felt hollow. The weight of unspoken words pressed down on us both. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, I found myself standing at the window, watching George's car pull into the driveway. I held my breath, bracing for another silent night. But that night was different. He didn't come straight inside. Instead, he sat in the car, staring into the darkening sky as if searching for answers he couldn't find. I didn't know whether to reach out or retreat, so I stayed where I was, watching him struggle in silence. It was the first time in months I saw that lost look in his eyes, the same look I had felt in my own reflection. It was a crack in the armor, a moment of vulnerability neither of us was ready to face. Days passed with no words exchanged between us. The house felt like a fragile shell, holding memories too painful to face, yet too precious to let go. I began to wonder if we had reached the point of no return, or if there was still a thread we could hold on to, fragile but real. In the midst, Of this silence, I found myself returning to old habits, the small joys that had once filled my days. I started tending my garden again, coaxing life from the soil with careful hands. The flowers bloomed in defiance of the sadness, their colors bright against the dull backdrop of my heart. I spent mornings watching the sun rise, feeling the gentle warmth on my face, trying to believe that there could be light even after such darkness. But grief has a way of creeping into the corners of your mind when you least expect it. On some nights, tears would come without warning, soaking my pillow while the house lay still around me. The ache wasn't just about George's betrayal. It was about the years we'd shared, the dreams we had built together, now crumbling like dry leaves underfoot. One afternoon, as I sorted through old letters and photographs in the attic, I found a box I hadn't opened in years. It was filled with mementos from our early days. Love notes, ticket stubs, newspaper clippings of the children's school plays. I held each piece carefully, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on me. It was both a comfort and a torment that night. I sat by the window clutching a faded photo of George and me on our wedding day. His eyes sparkled with hope and promise, the man I thought I knew so well. I whispered to the shadows, asking if he still remembered those days, if the man behind the distance was the same one who once held me close with all his heart. Sleep came fitfully, chased away by dreams filled with whispers and shadows. When morning light spilled through the curtains, I felt the first flicker of a decision forming deep inside me. I couldn't stay trapped in the silence anymore. I needed to face whatever was left, for myself and for the life I still wanted to live. I reached for my phone and began making calls. Old friends I hadn't seen in years. People who knew me before the weight of betrayal settled on my shoulders. Each conversation chipped away at the walls I had built around my heart. Slowly I found a thread of connection, a reminder that I was not alone in this struggle. Among those calls, one conversation surprised me the most. It was with a woman named Evelyn, a neighbor I had barely spoken to before Margaret arrived. She was older, wise in ways only time can teach, and her voice carried a warmth that felt like a lifeline. She listened without judgment, sharing her own stories of loss and renewal. Evelyn's words stirred something inside me, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, healing was possible. She told me about the power of small steps, of finding joy in ordinary moments, and of the strength that comes from choosing to move forward, even when the path is unclear. Encouraged by that conversation, I started venturing outside more often. I took walks along the familiar streets of Asheville, watching the seasons change and feeling the rhythm of life pulse around me. Each step was a quiet rebellion against the weight of sorrow, a declaration that I was still here, still fighting, yet, even as I began to rebuild, shadows lingered. George's absence was a wound that refused to close, and the silence between us stretched wider every day. I wondered if he felt the same emptiness, or if he had already moved on in ways I couldn't see. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. It was handwritten, folded carefully, and sealed with a crease that spoke of hesitation. My hands trembled as I opened it, afraid of what I might find, but desperate to understand. The words inside were unexpected. George wrote about his confusion, his regrets, and a longing for forgiveness that felt both sincere and distant. He admitted to mistakes but also hinted at struggles he had kept hidden for years, fears and doubts that had grown like weeds between us. Reading his words, I felt a storm of emotions. Pain, anger, relief, and a deep sadness for the man I thought I knew, but never fully understood. It was clear that he was fighting his own battles, caught in a web of regret and fear. That night I sat with the letter clutched in my hand, staring out at the quiet streets. The world around me moved on, indifferent to the turmoil inside. I realized that healing would not come easily, and that the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with pain. But beneath the weight of sorrow, a small flame flickered, a stubborn spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. It whispered that even broken hearts could find their way back to light, that even in the deepest suffering, there could be moments of grace. As the days turned into weeks, I made a choice. I would not let this betrayal define me or steal my future. I would face the pain, gather the fragments of my shattered heart, and find a way to live again. The journey was just beginning, and I knew there would be more storms ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I believed I could weather them. The house remained filled with silence and memories, but inside me, something was stirring, a quiet strength growing in the shadows, and still, the questions lingered, unanswered and heavy. The weight of the letter in my hand settled deep inside me like a stone. For days, I didn't know how to respond, how to even face George when he finally came home. The quiet between us had grown too thick to cut through with words. I was afraid of what I might see in his eyes, the regret, the guilt, or worse, the indifference. I tried to hold on to the fragile hope that had started to flicker after my talk with Evelyn, but it wasn't easy. Some mornings the ache in my chest was so heavy that I could barely get out of bed. The memories of laughter and love, tangled with betrayal and silence, clashed violently in my mind. How do you hold on to the good when the bad feels so overpowering? George returned one afternoon, quiet and hesitant. The house felt different somehow as he stepped inside, like the air was charged with something unspoken. He avoided my gaze, his footsteps light as he moved through the rooms we once shared freely. I watched him, unsure if I wanted to reach out or shut the door on the past forever. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter still folded beside my cup of cold tea. It was a small act of defiance, a refusal to let the silence consume me entirely. He didn't say much, and neither did I. Sometimes, words just get lost in the space between two broken people. That night, sleep evaded me again. I found myself pacing the living room, the shadows playing tricks on the walls. I wondered how it had come to this. Two people who had built a life, who had promised forever. Now strangers sharing the same space but living separate lives, I thought. About the dreams we once had, the plans we made for our children, and the quiet moments we used to steal in the early mornings. Those memories were bittersweet now, reminders of what had been and what might never be again. Days bled into weeks. George and I existed in parallel worlds, our conversations reduced to necessities. Who would buy groceries? Which bills needed paying? Reminders of appointments and chores. The warmth between us was gone, replaced by a cold distance neither of us dared to cross. In the midst of this emotional exile, I found solace in the garden. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the rhythm of planting and tending. Each seed I planted felt like a small act of hope, a belief that something new could grow even in the hardest soil. One afternoon, as I knelt among the roses and daisies, I noticed the first signs of life pushing through the earth. Tiny green shoots breaking the surface, fragile yet determined. I smiled through the tears that threatened to spill, understanding that growth often comes from the darkest places. Still, the house remained silent. The rooms echoed with what was unsaid, with the wounds we both carried but refused to heal openly. George stayed longer away from home, and when he returned, the distance between us was palpable. I started spending more time with Evelyn. Her presence was a balm to my aching soul. She shared stories from her own life, losses, heartaches, and moments of quiet triumph. Her wisdom was not the kind that comes from books, but from lived experience, and it gave me strength I hadn't known I needed. Evelyn encouraged me to find my own voice again, to reach beyond the pain and reclaim the woman I was before all of this began. She spoke gently but firmly about the power of forgiveness, not just for others but for ourselves. Inspired by her words, I began writing, not letters or stories for anyone else, but for me. I poured my fears, my anger, my sadness onto the pages. Writing became a way to untangle the knots in my heart, a silent conversation with myself that brought clarity amid the chaos. One day, while sorting through a box of old belongings, I found a small journal George had kept years ago. It was filled with sketches, snippets of poetry, and thoughts he had never shared. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of what I might find, but curiosity won. Reading his words, I glimpsed a side of him I hadn't seen in years, the young man full of dreams and hope before the weight of life pressed down on him. It was a reminder that beneath the mistakes and betrayals, there was still a person struggling, just like me. I held on to that thought as the days grew shorter and the nights colder. The autumn wind swept through the trees outside, scattering leaves, like memories drifting away. I felt the first stirrings of a new resolve, a quiet determination to face whatever lay ahead with courage. But the past has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. One evening, as I was closing the shutters against an early frost, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was hesitant, familiar yet distant. It was Margaret. Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and desperation. She spoke of mistakes she'd made, of regrets that haunted her. She claimed to want to make amends, to tell the truth about everything she had done. Not just to George, but to others around the neighborhood. I listened, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and curiosity. Part of me wanted to slam the phone down, to never hear from her again. But another part, the part still searching for closure, urged me to hear her out. Margaret revealed things I hadn't known. Dark secrets that cast new light on the tangled web of lies and betrayal. She spoke of manipulation, of playing people against each other to protect herself. She admitted to her affair with the retired attorney, too, but said it had been a desperate attempt to survive her own struggles. The more she spoke, the more I realized how complicated the story really was. No one was innocent, and everyone had their own pain and reasons for the choices they made. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about survival, fear, and the desperate need for connection. After that call, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, pity. The neat lines between victim and perpetrator blurred into a messy tangle of human flaws and frailty. I wondered if George felt the same confusion, the same turmoil. Margaret asked to meet, to explain everything in person. I agreed, though I didn't know if I was ready to face her again. When the day came, I found myself sitting across from her at a quiet cafe, the same place where I had once overheard their conversations. She looked smaller somehow, less confident. The bravado was gone, replaced by vulnerability. She spoke honestly, without excuses, about her pain and mistakes. It was a difficult conversation, filled with raw truths and uncomfortable admissions. I left that meeting feeling exhausted but lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. The tangled mess of betrayal and secrets was still there, but now I could see the threads more clearly. Back at home, I began to notice small changes in George, too. He started coming home earlier, lingering in the kitchen while I cooked. We didn't speak much at first, but there was a new softness in his presence, a silent acknowledgement of the pain we shared. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one, he reached out and took my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a world of meaning. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way back. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges we both had to face. But for the first time since everything had shattered, I believed that healing was possible, not in forgetting the past, but in learning to live with it. I knew the journey wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, tears, and moments of doubt. But I was ready to face them, to reclaim my life and my dignity, step by step. The garden bloomed anew with the promise of spring, and so did I, fragile yet unbroken. The fragile peace that had started to settle over our lives felt like a tentative promise rather than a certainty. Every morning I woke with a mixture of hope and dread, wondering if today would be the day everything fell apart again. The silence between George and me was no longer heavy with resentment, but laced with a cautious kindness. Still, neither of us spoke much about the past, as if by ignoring it, we could somehow pretend it never happened. But some wounds refused to heal quietly. One morning, as I was preparing breakfast, I noticed George sitting at the kitchen table, his hands clenched tightly around a folded piece of paper. His face was pale, eyes distant, as if he were carrying a burden too heavy to share. The air in the room thickened with unspoken words. He finally spoke, voice low and trembling. The letter was from his sister, a woman I hadn't seen in years. She wrote about their childhood, about memories George never talked about, the family, secrets they had buried long ago. Reading her words, I saw a different side of him, a man shaped not just by our life together, but by shadows from his past. That day I realized that our pain wasn't just about infidelity or broken trust. It was about years of silence, unspoken grief, and the scars we carried alone. I knew then that if we wanted to heal, we had to confront not only our recent wounds, but the deep roots of our suffering. Days passed and George slowly opened up about his childhood, a story filled with hardship and neglect. His parents had been distant, leaving him to fend for himself in a world that demanded strength he barely had. Those early years of loneliness and fear had forged a man who hid his pain behind silence and control. I listened with a heart full of empathy, seeing the boy behind the man I had loved and lost. For the first time, I understood how his struggles had shaped the man who betrayed me. Not to excuse his actions, but to see the complexity of the human heart. We began to share small moments again, a shared cup of coffee, a glance that held more than just routine. The house started to feel less like a prison and more like a home, yet the past still lingered, casting long shadows over our fragile connection. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old photographs, I stumbled upon a picture of us from decades ago, young, hopeful, smiling with a future stretched out before us. The contrast between that image and the present struck me like a blow. I clutched the photo, tears blurring my vision. The years had taken so much from us, the innocence, the trust, the certainty. But they had not taken everything. Somewhere beneath the hurt and anger, love still remained, waiting for a chance to be reborn. It was during this time that I reconnected with old friends, women who had weathered their own storms and emerged stronger. Their stories of resilience and quiet triumph inspired me, reminding me that even in the darkest moments, there is light to be found. One friend, Linda, shared how she rebuilt her life after losing everything. Her courage gave me the strength to believe in the possibility of a new beginning. We spent long afternoons talking about dreams and fears, finding comfort in shared experience. Encouraged by these conversations, I began to look beyond the walls of our house. I took up volunteering at a local community center, helping others who face their own battles. The act of giving, of reaching out, filled a hollow part of me I hadn't known existed. Each smile I received, each word of thanks, became a stitch in the fabric of my healing. I learned that strength comes not from ignoring pain, but from facing it and choosing to keep moving forward. Back at home, George and I continued to navigate the uncertain path between forgiveness and memory. We didn't speak of Margaret or the betrayals, but we acknowledged the wounds they left behind through quiet gestures, an embrace, a shared meal, a look of understanding. One evening, as we sat together watching the sun dip below the horizon, George reached for my hand again. This time his grip was steady and sure. No words were needed. In that simple touch I felt the fragile beginnings of trust. Yet beneath the surface, old fears simmered. I worried that one misstep could undo everything we had worked so hard to rebuild. The past was never far away, lurking in the corners of our lives like a shadow waiting to reclaim its hold. The turning point came unexpectedly. I received a call from Margaret. Her voice was urgent, her tone pleading. She claimed to have information, something that could change everything, something about George that even I didn't know. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to open that door again, but the need for closure, for truth, outweighed my fear. I agreed to meet her one last time, determined to hear what she had to say. When we met, Margaret's story unfolded like a confession. She spoke of struggles and regrets, of mistakes born from desperation. She revealed that George had been carrying a secret, something that explained much of his behavior over the years. The revelation shook me to the core. It was a truth that altered everything I thought I knew about my husband and our life together. For the first time, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit into place, revealing a picture both heartbreaking and redemptive. As I listened, tears streamed down my face. The pain was raw and real. But beneath it, I felt a strange sense of relief. The mystery that had haunted me for so long was finally unraveling. When I returned home that night, I found George waiting. He didn't speak at first, but in his eyes, I saw the same mix of fear and hope I felt inside. We talked long into the night, sharing secrets and truths that had been buried too deep for too long. The walls between us crumbled, replaced by a fragile bridge of understanding. In the weeks that followed, our lives began to shift. The shadows of the past grew smaller as we faced them together. The pain didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled us. I found new strength in forgiveness. Not forgetting, but choosing to embrace the future with open arms. George and I were not the same people who had started this journey, but we were connected by a bond forged in the fire of suffering and tempered by love. The garden bloomed around us, vibrant and alive. Each new flower was a symbol of the resilience we had found within ourselves and each other. And in that quiet garden, beneath the endless sky, I realized that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that from the darkest nights, the brightest dawns emerge. The days that followed our late-night conversation with George felt like walking on a tightrope, stretched thin between hope and uncertainty. Each step we took was cautious, tentative, but there was something new, a fragile thread of understanding, weaving through the fabric of our fractured relationship. I tried to hold on to that thread, grasp it tightly whenever doubt or pain threatened to pull me under. The truth George had shared was heavy, something I hadn't expected to learn after all these years. It wasn't just the affair or Margaret's betrayal anymore. It was a deep wound from his past, a burden he'd carried silently and alone, and it had shaped so much of who he was. The man I had loved, the man I had resented, and the man I was now trying to understand. It was a past marked by loss and regret, mistakes he never dared to confess, and fears that haunted him even now. Some nights I found myself awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through memories of our life together, the good and the bad, the laughter and the tears. I remembered when we first moved into that little house in Asheville, so full of dreams, but with pockets nearly empty. We scrimped and saved, raised our children with love despite the constant worry about money. I thought we had built something solid, something that could weather any storm. But life has a way of testing even the strongest foundations. George's silence during those difficult times had been his way of protecting us. Or so I believed then. Now I saw it differently. It was a wall, a defense mechanism built from years of fear and shame. I wished he had told me earlier, but I understood why he hadn't. It was easier to hide pain than to face it head on. One afternoon I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood, hoping to clear my mind. The sun was warm, the trees casting long shadows on the pavement. I passed the houses we had known for years, some filled with happy memories, others with silent regrets. I stopped near Margaret's old house, now vacant and quiet, the recent past feeling like a distant storm fading into the horizon. As I turned to leave, I saw an elderly woman sitting on her porch down the street. She was knitting, her hands moving with practiced ease, her face soft but lined with the kind of stories only time can tell. We exchanged a brief smile, and I found myself drawn to her gentle presence. I walked over and sat beside her, grateful for the simple comfort of a stranger's company. She introduced herself as Ruth, and we began to talk. Her voice was calm and steady, full of wisdom born from a long life. She shared stories of her own hardships, losing her husband, raising children alone, battling loneliness, and how she found strength in small moments of kindness and resilience. Listening to Ruth, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope, not the naive kind, but the steady, quiet hope that grows when you realize you are not alone in your struggles. Her words were a balm to my weary soul, a reminder that pain was part of life, but it didn't have to define us. Back home, George and I continued to tread the delicate path toward healing. We weren't perfect, far from it. There were days when anger bubbled to the surface, and nights when silence stretched like a chasm between us. But we were trying. Each small step forward felt like a victory, each shared moment a fragile thread mending the tear in our lives. One evening, as we sat in the living room, George pulled out an old photo album. We flipped through the pages together, memories flooding back with each picture. The birth of our children, family vacations, quiet nights by the fire. I saw the young faces we once were, full of hope and dreams that seemed so distant now. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized how much we had survived, how many storms we had weathered. It wasn't just about betrayal or pain anymore. It was about endurance, about the strength to keep loving even when the world seemed to be falling apart. The children had grown and moved away, carving out their own lives far from the house where we had raised them. Their visits were infrequent but cherished, reminders of the family we had built despite everything. They knew of our struggles, but not all the details. Some wounds, I believed, were better left in the past. Yet the silence between George and me was sometimes deafening, filled with the ghosts of what could have been and what never was. I longed for a way to bridge that gap, to find words that could heal instead of hurt. One day I found an old letter tucked away in a drawer. A letter George had written to me early in our marriage but never sent. It was filled with promises and dreams, hopes for a life filled with love and laughter. Reading it, I felt a pang of sorrow and a flicker of the man I once knew. I showed the letter to George, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled. A genuine smile that reached his eyes. We talked about those early days, about the dreams we shared, and how life had changed us. It was a moment of connection, fragile but still. But healing is never a straight line. Not long after, an unexpected visitor came to our door. One of George's old friends. Someone from his past I barely knew. He brought news that reopened old wounds, reminding George of choices he had made long ago, decisions that still haunted him. The visit stirred up emotions I hadn't expected. Anger, guilt, fear. George retreated into himself, the walls going back up as the past pressed down harder. I watched helplessly, aching to reach him but unsure how. That night as we lay in bed, the silence between us was thick. I felt the weight of years pressing down, threatening to crush the fragile hope we had built. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice urged me to keep fighting, to hold on to the possibility of redemption. In the weeks that followed, George and I faced those demons together. We talked through memories and regrets, shared tears and frustrations. It was painful, exhausting, but necessary. I realized that true healing meant facing the worst of ourselves and each other, not running away. Slowly, the light began to return. We found new ways to connect, small rituals, shared hobbies, moments of laughter. George took up gardening, and I joined him outside, planting flowers that seemed to bloom brighter with each passing day. The garden became a symbol of our healing, a living testament to resilience and renewal. One afternoon, as we tended to the roses, George looked at me with a tenderness I hadn't seen in years. He apologized, not just for the affair, but for the years of silence and distance. His words were simple but powerful, a balm to my wounded heart. I forgave him, not because I forgot, but because I chose to believe in the man he was becoming. Forgiveness was not about erasing the past, but about freeing ourselves to move forward. As spring turned to summer, our home felt alive again. The laughter of grandchildren echoed through the halls during their visits, filling the space with warmth and joy. Our family, though imperfect, was still a source of strength and love. I began writing again, something I hadn't done in years. Putting my thoughts on paper helped me process the pain and hope swirling inside me. My stories were honest and raw, reflections of a life shaped by sorrow and resilience. Sharing my writing with close friends brought unexpected comfort and connection. They saw themselves in my words, and together we found solace in shared experience. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the stars, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long and difficult, filled with suffering and uncertainty, but I had emerged stronger. I understood now that life's true beauty lies not in perfection, but in our ability to endure and grow. George and I had built something new, not the life we once dreamed of, but one richer and deeper because of the struggles we faced. We learned to hold each other's scars gently, to cherish the moments of light amid the shadows. And though the past would always be a part of us, it no longer defined who we were or who we could become. The healing we had begun felt like a fragile thread stretched across a vast chasm. Any sudden movement could snap it. Yet day by day, George and I found ourselves walking a little further along that thread, hand in hand, learning again what it meant to trust and to forgive. But beneath the surface, old wounds still throbbed, invisible to the casual eye, but raw to us. One morning, as the sunlight filtered softly through the kitchen window, I found George seated at the table, a faraway look in his eyes. He was holding a worn photograph, one I hadn't seen before. The edges were frayed and the colors had faded over time. But the image was sharp enough to recognize the people. Young, smiling faces full of promise. It was a photo of his family from long ago. Before I had entered his life, I sat beside him, quietly. There were things in that photo that George had never spoken of. Secrets buried in the folds of the past. Shadows that shaped the man I thought I knew. For the first time, he began to unravel those memories, and I listened as he painted a picture of a childhood, marked by hardship, loneliness, and a yearning for something he could never quite grasp. His father had been a stern man, distant and often absent, leaving George to raise himself in a world that didn't offer much mercy. His mother had struggled with illness, and the weight of responsibility had fallen on his young shoulders. The pain of growing up without the warmth of family love was something George carried silently for decades. As he spoke, I felt the edges of his pain seep into my own heart. It was a shared grief, a silent understanding that we both carried scars from different battles. In that moment, the gulf between us seemed smaller, bridged by vulnerability and honesty. But life rarely offers easy paths. One afternoon, I noticed George withdrawing again, retreating into a shell of silence. I could feel the walls rising once more, the familiar defense mechanisms he had built over the years. I tried to reach him with gentle words and quiet presence, but he seemed locked away, haunted by ghosts that refused to rest. Then came the letter. A letter that arrived unexpectedly, stirring the fragile peace we had found. It was from a woman George had once loved, a name I barely knew, written with a hand trembling between regret and longing. The words were raw, filled with remorse and unanswered questions, and they opened a wound that had never fully healed. George read the letter, in silence, his face pale as memories flooded back. He told me of a love lost too soon, torn apart by circumstances neither of them could control. It was a chapter of his life he had buried deep, afraid to revisit the pain. Now, with the letter's arrival, the past demanded his attention. Days turned into restless nights as George wrestled with emotions long suppressed. I watched him struggle, feeling powerless yet determined to stand by him. The weight of his history was not mine to carry, but it shaped the present in ways I could not ignore. One evening, as rain pattered softly against the window pane, George confided in me his fears of repeating old mistakes, of losing himself, again in regrets. I held his hand, offering the only comfort I could, my presence, unwavering and steady. Slowly we began to confront the shadows together. We sought help from a counselor, someone patient and kind, who guided us through the labyrinth of emotions. It was not an easy journey. Tears flowed freely, truths were laid bare, and the pain of years unfolded like a storm. But through the storm, a fragile bloom of hope emerged. The counselor helped George see that his past did not define him, that he had the power to change the course of his life. And for me, the process was a revelation, a chance to understand not only George but also myself, to recognize the patterns of pain and resilience woven through our shared story. As spring turned to summer, the days grew longer and warmer. Our garden, once a symbol of tentative healing, blossomed with new life. Roses, lilies, and daisies stretched toward the sun, their colors vibrant against the clear blue sky. Tending the garden became a meditation, a way to nurture something living and beautiful amidst the turmoil. One afternoon, as we worked side by side, George reached out and brushed a stray hair from my face. His touch was gentle, filled with a tenderness that spoke of new beginnings. I smiled, feeling the warmth of connection rekindled after so many years. Yet, the past was never far behind. Margaret's name lingered in the shadows. Her betrayal, still a sharp ache in my heart. Though the storm of her deceit had passed, the scars remained. I found myself replaying those painful moments, wondering how I could have been so blind, so vulnerable. But I refused to let bitterness consume me. Instead, I chose to channel that pain into strength, to rebuild my sense of self from the ashes of heartbreak. I joined a local book club, reconnecting with friends and finding joy in shared stories and laughter. I began volunteering at the community center, offering my time and energy to others who struggled in silence. Through these small acts, I discovered a new purpose, a way to transform suffering into hope. The community became a sanctuary, a place where I could be both vulnerable and strong, where stories of pain and resilience intertwined. George supported me quietly, his presence a steady anchor in the shifting tides of my emotions. We learned to celebrate the small victories, a shared smile, a moment of understanding, a day without anger or pain. But life's challenges were far from over. One evening, a phone call shattered the fragile calm. It was from our daughter, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. She had lost her job, and with it, the stability she had fought so hard to create. The weight of responsibility fell on us once again, pulling us into a new storm. George and I faced this crisis together, drawing on the lessons we had learned. We offered support and encouragement, reminding our daughter of her strength and worth. It was a painful reminder that life struggles never truly end. They simply change shape, demanding resilience anew. Through it all, I held on to the belief that even in suffering, there is grace, that love, though tested, can endure, that the human spirit, fragile yet fierce, has the power to rise again. As summer gave way to autumn, the leaves turning gold and crimson, George and I sat on our porch, watching the world change around us. The years had left their mark, but so had our journey. The trials, the tears, the healing. I looked at George, the man who had once been a stranger to me, then a partner, then a source of pain, and now a companion walking beside me through the twilight of our lives. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that no matter what the future held, we had found something precious, a love tempered by suffering, strengthened by forgiveness, and illuminated by hope. The weight of the years pressed heavily on my shoulders, but even heavier was the burden of memories that refused to fade. I found myself walking through the rooms of our home, haunted by echoes of laughter and whispers, shadows of better days and darker nights. George was there, of course, but something between us remained fragile, as though the slightest tremor might send us crashing into ruins once more. Despite the progress we'd made, the past was a specter that clung to every conversation, every glance. I could see it in George's eyes, a flicker of doubt, a hesitation to fully trust himself or me. And in my own heart, I felt the tremor of fear, the haunting question of whether what we had rebuilt could ever truly last. The turning point came unexpectedly, on an ordinary afternoon that held the weight of everything to come. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm but carried a weight that stopped me cold. It was Margaret. I hadn't spoken to her since that night. The night when truths were laid bare and everything shifted. She asked to meet, to talk. Reluctantly, I agreed. We met at a quiet park bench, shaded by ancient oaks whose leaves whispered secrets on the breeze. Margaret looked different, worn, fragile, as if the years of deception had finally caught up with her. There was no bravado, no defense, just a weary woman seeking something. Perhaps forgiveness, or understanding, or her own release. She spoke in a low voice, telling me about the tangled web she'd lived in, the lies she told not out of malice, but desperation. She revealed the emptiness beneath the charm, the fear that drove her to manipulate those around her. For the first time, I saw her not as the enemy who shattered my life, but as a broken soul trying to survive. Listening to her, I felt a strange mix of pity and sorrow. The anger I'd carried like armor began to crack, replaced by a fragile compassion. It was not an easy choice, but I knew I could not carry the weight of hatred any longer. Margaret asked for forgiveness, not in grand gestures, but in small, quiet ways. Permission to live without the shadow of her past mistakes. I hesitated, then nodded, not for her sake, but for mine. Returning home, I felt lighter, as if a part of the darkness had lifted. I shared the encounter with George, who listened with a complexity of emotions. Relief, disbelief, a cautious hope. It was a step we never imagined taking, yet it opened a new door. In the weeks that followed, the fragile truce between past and present grew stronger. Margaret moved away quietly, disappearing like a ghost from our lives. The house felt less heavy, the air clearer. But life had other challenges waiting, silent and relentless. Our daughter's struggles deepened. Job loss was only the surface of her troubles. Underneath lay a crumbling marriage, mounting debts, and a despair that seeped into every corner of her world. She called often, her voice trembling, and we did what we could from afar, offering support, advice, and sometimes just listening. One cold autumn night, the phone rang again. This time it was her, broken and afraid. She had nowhere to turn, no place to go. Without hesitation, George and I opened our home and hearts once more. Those days were exhausting and raw, filled with tears and long conversations in the dark. Our daughter, once so full of life and dreams, was now fragile and lost. Watching her suffer was a pain unlike any other, a twisting ache that settled deep in my bones. But it also awakened something fierce inside me, a determination to fight for my family, to refuse surrender. I threw myself into the role of caretaker, counselor, and guardian, balancing my own fragile recovery with the urgent needs of the present. The nights were long, filled with whispered fears and uncertain hopes. I held my daughter close, promising her that we would find a way through, that she was not alone. It was a promise I made not just to her, but to myself. One morning, as dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds, I found myself standing on the porch, breath visible in the crisp air. George joined me silently, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. We looked out over the neighborhood, the familiar streets that held so many memories, some painful, some precious. He took my hand, and for a moment the world felt still. It was in that stillness that I realized how far we had come, not just through betrayal and loss, but through the slow, painstaking work of healing. We were not the same people who had weathered those early storms. We were stronger, tempered by pain and hope alike. Yet even as the present held moments of peace. The future remained uncertain. Our daughter's path to recovery was not linear. There were days when despair threatened to consume her again, and days when hope flickered like a candle in the dark. We celebrated every small victory. A smile, a phone call, a moment of laughter. I found myself reflecting on the fragility of life, the unexpected turns that shape our stories. I thought about the women my age, scattered across the country, each carrying their own burdens and triumphs. How many of us had faced betrayal, loss, and pain, and yet still rose each day to face the world with courage. One afternoon, as I sifted through old photo albums, I came across a picture of my mother, strong and radiant, despite her own hardships. I felt a connection across time, a lineage of resilience and love that flowed through generations. That evening, I shared the photo with George. We talked about legacy, about what we hope to leave behind. Not possessions or accolades, but stories of endurance, of love that survived even the darkest storms. As the days shortened and winter approached, our home filled with quiet moments, cups of tea by the fire, soft music playing in the background, the gentle rhythm of life rebuilt. The pain never fully disappeared, but it softened into something manageable, a shadow that reminded us of where we had been and how far we had come. And then, just when I thought we had reached a place of calm, an unexpected letter arrived. This one was different. Not from the past, but from a stranger who had heard my story through a mutual friend. She wrote of her own struggles, her own losses, and how my words had given her hope. It was a reminder that even in our darkest moments, our stories carry power, not just to heal ourselves, but to touch others in ways we never imagined. I kept that letter close, reading it on the hardest days, drawing strength from the connection it represented. George and I continued to walk this path together, step by step, holding on to the fragile hope that the future could be kinder. We learned to cherish the ordinary moments, the warmth of a shared meal, the comfort of a hand held tight, the simple beauty of a sunset fading into night. The years had taught me many things, that suffering is inevitable, but so is healing, that love can be fractured and still survive, and that even the deepest wounds can give way to new growth. I am no longer the woman who discovered betrayal on a quiet evening years ago. I am stronger now, tempered by pain and hope alike. My story is one of survival, of rediscovery, and of the quiet power that lies within us all. And though the journey is far from over, I face each day with courage, knowing that even in suffering, there is always a glimmer of light. The winter gave way to a gentle spring, and with it came a renewed sense of possibility, fragile but persistent. George and I had settled into a rhythm that felt honest, free from the weight of secrets and shadows that had once threatened to drown us. Yet beneath that calm surface, the years of pain and struggle still whispered, reminding me of how close we'd come to losing everything. Each morning, as the sun spilled golden light across our modest home in Asheville, I felt a stirring inside me, a quiet insistence that life still held surprises, that healing was a journey not just of endurance, but of transformation. Our daughter's path toward recovery became clearer with each passing day. She found work, slowly rebuilt friendships, and began to dream again in colors that had faded during her darkest days. Seeing her regain her spirit was like witnessing the first blossoms after a long, harsh winter, tentative, beautiful, and filled with promise. George and I too found new ways to connect. We took long walks along the Blue Ridge Parkway, shared quiet dinners on our porch, and spent evenings talking about our hopes, fears, and the strange grace of second chances. It was not the perfect life I had once imagined, but it was whole, raw, and deeply human. One afternoon, while sorting through some old belongings in the attic, I stumbled upon a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were letters, photographs, and keepsakes from the earliest days of our marriage. The laughter of young love, dreams carved in hopeful handwriting, and moments frozen in time. As I touched each piece, memories flooded back, some joyful, others painful, but all a part of the tapestry that had shaped us. I showed the box to George that evening. We sat side by side, sharing stories behind each memento, rediscovering parts of ourselves that the years had buried beneath hardship and heartache. It was a balm to our souls, a reminder that love, even when tested, could endure. Yet, life's trials were never far away. One spring evening, as I prepared dinner, the phone rang. It was a voice I hadn't heard in decades, a distant relative, reaching out after years of silence. They spoke of old family matters, unresolved conflicts, and secrets long buried beneath polite smiles and avoided topics. The conversation stirred something unsettled within me, a reminder that the past never truly lets go. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, pondering the threads of my family's history, the sacrifices, the mistakes, and the echoes of pain, passed down through generations. I realized how much of my own story was woven into that larger fabric, how healing myself meant facing not only my own wounds, but the legacy I carried. The following weeks brought more unexpected calls, visits, and conversations. Some were uncomfortable, others surprisingly tender. I found myself navigating a complex web of relationships, truths, and forgiveness. It was a delicate dance, requiring patience, courage, and a willingness to confront shadows long ignored. Through it all, George stood by me, his quiet strength a steady anchor. Together we faced the echoes of the past, not with bitterness, but with a resolve to break the cycle of pain. As summer approached, our neighborhood blossomed with life. Children playing in yards, neighbors gathering for barbecues, and the slow hum of ordinary days. Amid this, I felt a stirring desire to give back, to transform my pain into purpose. I began volunteering at a local community center, offering companionship and support to other women navigating the complexities of aging, loss, and renewal. Listening to their stories, sharing mine, I discovered a wellspring of connection and healing that transcended individual struggles. One afternoon, while leading a small group discussion, I noticed a woman whose eyes held the same mixture of sorrow and strength I recognized in myself. Our conversations grew deeper, unfolding layers of pain, hope, and resilience. Through her, I saw the power of shared experience to heal wounds that solitude only deepens. These moments renewed my faith in the human spirit, the capacity to rise, to forgive, and to love, despite everything. But just as I began to believe that peace was within reach, life delivered one last, unexpected challenge. George received news that unsettled us both. A health scare that reminded us how fragile time truly was. The diagnosis was not immediate danger, but enough to shake the foundations of our newfound calm. We faced the uncertainty together, drawing on the strength forged in years of trials. Medical appointments, tests, and quiet moments filled our days. Fear lingered, but it no longer ruled us. Instead, it deepened our appreciation for each other and the preciousness of every moment. During those long days in sterile waiting rooms and quiet hospital corridors, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The betrayals, the heartbreak, the fierce determination to reclaim our lives. In George's presence, I felt a profound gratitude for the man who had been my partner through it all, imperfect but steadfast. The weeks passed with cautious optimism. Treatments began. Progress was slow but steady, and hope grew like a fragile bud, pushing through frozen earth. As autumn leaves began to fall, we sat together on our porch, wrapped in blankets watching the sky turn fiery shades of red and gold. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a testament to survival, love, and the unpredictable grace of life. Looking back, I understood that the pain I had endured was not a curse, but a crucible. It had shaped me into someone who could face darkness without losing sight of the light. Our story was far from ordinary, marked by suffering and sorrow, but also by resilience, forgiveness, and the slow, steady rebuilding of a life worth living. I no longer feared what the future might hold, because I had learned that strength is born in the cracks, that hope can flourish even in the harshest soil. And so, I face each day with an open heart, ready to embrace whatever comes, knowing that even after the deepest pain, there is a chance for redemption and joy. My journey has been long and arduous, filled with moments that broke me and moments that made me whole again. But through it all, I have discovered the unbreakable truth that we are never defined solely by our suffering, but by how we rise after the fall. This is my story, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, the transformative nature of forgiveness, and the quiet strength that lives within us all.